Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're calling from. My name is Norma Toussaint, and I'd like to welcome you to this session entitled Supporting Successful Transitions to Local Actors. This session will be the last of the first thematic areas of Ideals Knowledge Sharing Series, Advancing Locally Led Coherence. Before we start, we'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded and that we are providing simultaneous interpretation in French. I'd like to invite everyone to select their preferred language for this session. You can do so by clicking in the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting either English or French. You can choose to mute the original audio or listen to it at a lower volume. At any time during the event, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat box feature. Today's session will be a dynamic dialogue where we'll hear from two entities who have made the transition to truly uplift local leadership. We will then open up the session for questions and also invite you to share your own experiences with transitioning to being more locally led, or how centering communities has enabled better HTP coherence in your work. With that, I'm happy to introduce our host for this session, Grace Boone, who is a program manager at CDA and manages the Stopping at Success program. Over to you, Grace.
Great, thank you so much. And good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm Grace. I'm calling in from right outside of Washington, DC. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you all this morning and to be in conversation with Tala and Pauline. Thank you to the whole Ideal team for inviting us into this conversation, and thank you all for joining us for our session today. It's really great to be with you all. So I've had the sincere pleasure of working with Pauline and Tala for the past 5 years. So we've been learning alongside each other since 2017, and they have been a part of the Stopping at Success project for that entire time. So I'm going to give just a brief background on Stopping at Success, sort of what has sort of brought us all together for the past 5 years, and then we will get into our discussion together. So Stopping at Success, what we now call SAS Plus, is a collaboration with CDA Collaborative Learning, which is the organization that I work for, Peace Direct, and Search for Common Ground. SAS Plus aims for development partnerships to be more locally led, for transitions to be more effective and responsible for local communities, and for development practitioners more broadly to be more responsive to local dynamics. So essentially, we've been learning about and working alongside organizations who have been going through transition processes from international to a locally led entity for the past 5 years. So that said, Tala and Pauline's organizations were case studies that the Stopping at Success program documented back in 2017. So for these case studies, we really wanted to document examples of responsible transition processes from international to local organizations or entities. We wanted to understand what went well and why, in order to learn from those real life examples and to be able to share the lessons that we were learning with other organizations going through transitions around the globe. So in total, Stopping at Success documented 19 case studies in 13 countries, and we found trends across all of the cases, right? So we saw in particular 6 themes: financial sustainability, communication, capacity strengthening, power, leadership, and partnership. We saw how all of these aspects really played a role in transition processes, and in some way or the other enabled them to be responsible and often successful. So these themes that we found across the cases then informed 30 or so tools and resources that address donors, international organizations, and local organizations who are looking for support throughout their transition process. Currently, our team is working with organizations going through active transitions in order to apply those lessons learned to processes with organizations around the globe. So we're offering what we call accompaniment support for organizations going through transition. So it can be long-term or short-term, depending on our partners' needs. But really, our goal most broadly is to support organizations operationalize good practice. I'm not going to go into detail on this just because we want to get into our conversation, but you can find a lot more information on our Partner with SAS website page. You're also free to contact me directly. I'll make sure my email's in the chat. We can talk more about it. So that said, I always love the opportunity to continue learning with our case study partners, because it really is an opportunity for us to continue to learn and see how their work has evolved and grown after this transition process and becoming a locally led organization. So today, Pauline and Tala will be sharing their transition story with us, how they went from an internationally to a locally led organization and the lessons that they've learned along the way. The three of us will be in discussion for the first 45 minutes or so, and then we will invite you all to be in conversation with us towards the end of our call. That said, we are going to be putting some questions in the chat, really short answer questions. We just want to get a sense of who's in the room and what your experience with transitions have been. So be on the lookout on the chat. We would really appreciate your engagement because we know it can be hard in this virtual moment to really get to know each other. So please be on the lookout for that. Okay, so with that, let's get into it. We'll start with introductions and then we'll dive in. So I'll start with Pauline. Pauline Mwambeti is the managing director of Nuru Kenya. So she led the transition process from Nuru International to Nuru Kenya, and she's had over 15 years of experience in community development. She's worked for the United Nations Environment's Regional Office, the National Organization for Peer Educators, KREP Bank Limited, and Doctors for the World. She's also a 2018 East Africa Acumen Fellow, sorry. And then Tala Batista is a member of the Sumatra First Nation in Kalinga, Philippines. She's had over 14 years experience in the peacebuilding field. She is currently the Senior Vice President for Coffee for Peace and the Chief Operations Officer for Peace Builders Community Incorporated. So with that, we're gonna just dive into it. Pauline and Tala, would love to just hand it off to both of you to share a little bit about yourself, organization, and just a little bit about the context you're working in and coming into this conversation with. So perhaps, Pauline, we can start with you, and then Tala, if you wanna jump in right after her, that would be great. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. I'm Pauline Mwambeti. I'm Pauline Mwambeti, and I work for Nuru Kenya as the managing director. I've been with the organization since 2013, and I was present and steering the transition from the expatriate team to the local team in 2015. Our organization is a locally registered non-governmental organization that is working with communities in remote rural areas of Kenya to empower them to lift themselves out of generational poverty through improving their livelihood sustainably. And we do that through co-creating and designing sustainable business solutions. So we transition the livelihoods into agribusinesses. That's what we are doing currently. We are in Migori. That is where we started the intervention, Migori County. We've scaled into Homa Bay and Baringo County. So we were part of the case study, the Stopping a Success, where we were able to document our journey from being an expatriate-led intervention and project to a locally led organization that is continuing to empower the communities to lead themselves. We deliver our intervention through farmer-led organizations, and in our context, these are cooperatives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pauline. So my name is Tala, and I'm an indigenous person. And it just struck me because every time we are asked to introduce ourselves in our tribe, we would tell our family name, our tribe name. And so when people ask, who are you? I will answer, well, my parents are, my grandparents are, I came from the tribe of. And I think that really shapes the worldview that I am carrying too in this conversation. That I'm not just an individual, but I am an individual in community. And so for Coffee for Peace, the meaning of peace, so that I will not repeat it later, or of how we define peace in the organization is it's harmony with the creator, and that's spiritual transformation, whatever the name of the creator is. Harmony with the being, that's psychosocial transformation. Harmony with others, socio-political transformation. And harmony with creation, economic, ecological transformation. So at least I'm transparent with the worldview that I'm coming from. Grace?
Thank you so much, Pauline and Tala. Great. So our first question is just to give us, continuing to learn a little bit more about your transition story. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, whatever you'd like to share, especially some of the challenges that you all experienced, how your organization changed as a part of the process, and any sort of big things that you attribute to why it was a responsible process. So Pauline, maybe let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Grace. So for Nuru, we started preparing for the transition way before 2015. The expatriate team was planning to transition in 2013. Unfortunately, the community experienced many challenges, and so the transition did not happen at that time. So when we were preparing for the transition, we were communicating to the community that the expatriate team, who are the foundation team, are going to leave the project. And this was communicated to them through the meetings, and we'd make sure we communicate often. Then we were also now incorporating the key opinion leaders in the co-creation process for the next steps after the transition. We were really keen on demonstrating impact. At the time when I joined in 2013, I was the impact programs manager, and we were really keen on demonstrating impact of the poverty-led poverty reduction model so that we could gain the trust of the community members. And we were making sure that whatever failures we were experiencing, we were learning very fast from them so that we could recover quite fast and continue. However, sometimes you plan things and they don't proceed the way you've planned. So the outcome of the preparation was that we had a vision roadmap. We were able to identify key opinion leaders to drive the process. We were able to come out with a post-exit relationship document that would guide our relationship after the transition. And we needed to chart out how are we going to relate with Nuru International or the foundation team after they left. They would continue to be our donors, and we would continue to rely on them for funding and also reporting our parameters, intervention parameters to them, but how do we relate with them as an NGO? And then we had needed to do restructuring, which we embarked on, and we started restructuring the organization from the board all the way to the local staff. And also we came up with a program. Eventually we came up with a program adaptation process guideline. But then we had challenges along the way when we were implementing all these plans. We experienced at some point communication breakdown. And we realized this even during the time when Grace and her team came down. We now had to really put more effort to make sure we communicate better with the community and the stakeholders, that we include them in the decision-making processes so that they don't feel left out. We also realized we were so engrossed or involved in executing the plans, and that is why sometimes we forget to communicate, and those dialogue sessions were becoming much fewer, and so the community would become uncertain of what next, and they felt that they were not sure-footed about even the continuity of the project. Then eventually there was also loss of trust, which led to even some resource losses, and that needed to be mitigated, because again, even our donors in the community needed to have confidence in our ability to continue to safeguard the resources that were left behind. We also had some hitches in technology, knowledge gaps, because we had technology that the expatriate or foundation team were very comfortable working with, but as the local team, we were not able to adjust to it. So when they left behind that infrastructure, we experienced difficulties in working with it. So we now are able to come up with solutions for these challenges. We realized we needed to communicate frequently to the community and be very transparent, that whatever challenges we were experiencing, we needed to come up with solutions together with them and dialogue more. We needed also to work on the issues of trust, gain their trust, and they needed to know that we are part of them. We come from this, we are natives of Kenya, we understand the issues that the community members are facing, and it is in our best interest to resolve them. So they should not feel like when the expatriate or foundation team has left, that the project is going to die. We also had to come up with infrastructure to mitigate on the losses so that we could safeguard whatever investment the donors had made since 2008 all the way to 2015, and also prove to them that they could continue to fund us and be confident that we are going to deliver on our promises. Then we also overhauled our infrastructure on technology so that we could have the team working with what they're comfortable with. And we were also able to bring in other stakeholders like the banks, the local bank, and they were able to support us with infrastructure that was safeguarding the investment the community was making, like the shares they contribute through the cooperatives, and also the revolving fund that was ensuring the farmers are continuing to access farming inputs every season. So some of the lessons we learned include the importance of investing in feedback, and you cannot have feedback if you're not encouraging dialogue. So we had to go back to the drawing board and create opportunities to communicate very often with the community and encourage them to give us feedback and hold us responsible and accountable for the things that we set ourselves up to do. Then we needed to be very flexible and patient, and we needed to be able to reach out to our foundation team to negotiate for this flexibility and the patience so that they don't push us also to do things very quickly in a manner that will jeopardize how we are engaging with the community. We also needed to make sure that we were able to document our failures so that we don't duplicate. Nuru International sets up country programs and they learn from us. We are the pioneer project, so we really needed to document our lessons so that they could be able to be a reference point for other country programs and even for ourselves as we continue to scale. Then we also needed to expose ourselves. For the longest time, we were just working in this area, and we invested in exposing our team, our technical team, to other interventions that were similar to ours. Some had failed, some were succeeding, and we needed to learn these failures so that we don't replicate, and also the successes for us to scale them. We needed to leverage on existing relationships. Sometimes when an international partner is on the ground, we really focus on them and we forget we have other resourceful partners who are within us, and they can become our greatest strength when we are operating on our own. Like the local bank came in very handy when we were setting up the infrastructure for the cashless platform to mitigate on the losses. Then we also were able to learn a very big lesson on relinquishing control. The donor probably was also not very sure-footed about our ability to deliver on our mandate on our own. And at some point, through the post-exit relationship document, we had to articulate what are we going to be doing? What are they going to be doing? For how long are they going to monitor us? How frequently will they require us to get on those monitoring calls? And how will evaluation be done? And we had to agree that we had to transition from a heavy touch approach to a light touch so that we could have room for innovation and creativity. And when you are the one funding a lot of resources, sometimes you feel insecure relinquishing control, but then we learned it has to happen for other things to be successful. Then being adaptive and evolving solutions, because our space is very dynamic. We have to evolve solutions as we progress and as they emerge. So I would say those are the few lessons, some of the few lessons I'm able to share right now, and I'll hand it over to Tala. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for sharing. Yeah, so as for us, or as for our organization, so when we talk about transition, the word right now is being talked in relation to localization, right? So transitioning from international to national. And I think I would like to touch on that first. So what do we mean by local? What do we mean by localization, right? Because then that's how we can define transition. And is it geographical, political? And for us, or for me and for the organizations we're working with, we look at it through in relation to power dynamics. So who has the power economically, who has the power politically or socially? And so, of course, notwithstanding what they call the term, I'm forgetting the term, but the different identities that we have, whoever has the lesser power is local. So for example, with our organization and international and our funders, then we will be considered local. But when we are relating with communities that we are working with, that we are journeying with, then we are no longer local. It's the communities who are local. So why is it important? Because it helps us to be sensitive to the power that we hold. And so for example, when I, as a member of Coffee for Peace, talk to international NGOs, I have a different language. The messages that I say are different when I am talking to coffee farmers that we are working with. So for example, and Grace, I think Grace knew this, when I'm working with international NGOs, I would be talking about decolonization. I would be talking about funding structure, or the organizational structure. I will be talking about that. But when I am talking to coffee farmers, that won't be my message. I would be talking about what do they have? What are their powers? I would be more focused on celebrating their identity, celebrating their stories. So that's very important for me and for the organizations too that I'm working. It's very, very important so that the messages that we are bringing are have a transformational impact depending on the context that we are studying. So of course I will not. Of course, when I'm with international NGOs, they already know their power. I will not celebrate it anymore because they're already celebrating it. So I have to be frank about that. So about transitions, now we're going to transitions. As an organization, transition is not a phase in the program because it has been from the very start locally led. And when I say locally led, it was envisioned by Peace Builders Community. So Peace Builders Community is the non-government organization where Coffee for Peace came from. So Coffee for Peace came out of the peace building work of Peace Builders Community, or PBCI. So right from the start, PBCI owns the vision. PBCI actually shared the vision to our international funder, the Mennonite Church Canada, or MCC or MC Canada, and they had they share the same values, they shared the same vision, and so it was a collaboration. So basically, with PBCI did not ask to fund a program. PBCI asked MC Canada if they believe in the vision, then they partner with us, and that's what they did, and that's what MC Canada did. So it was from the very start. So what does that mean for us as we work on the field? It means that just as we shared a vision to MC Canada, we also encourage, like we really, our way of working with communities is for them to share their vision. So we never go there with a program. We always, they actually invite us first. And then the first question is, how do you define this? What's your dream for your community? What's your dream for yourselves and your family? What do you have? So that is very different from the usual peace building, development, humanitarian practice, wherein we already have like this agenda, and then we ask people to see if they fit in the agenda, and then we ask them for log frame. We don't do that. We never do log frames. We always start with listening. So I think yeah, and well, I think that's the number one message that I would like to share. As for the challenges, especially for the first years, we have to be very careful in funding. Even though there are a lot of organizations inviting us to be funded or to fund us, we don't immediately get it. And just like what we do with the communities, we ask the funders, why do you want to fund us? Why do you want to partner with us? And do you believe in this vision? And so it's like not taking resources just because it's there. It's really vision-based. And that's a little difficult, especially if funds are low, right? So we really have to be very clear in our core, what do we really believe in? And when there are programs that you wanted to do, but there are no funds, and then there are funders, it's a challenge to say, no, we will not get the funds just because it's there. And for all these years, we never lacked anything. When it's really the Kairos moment, when it's really for peace, every time our experience is that the funds follow. And there were many moments that literally the funds are following us from town to town, when we thought that we can no longer go to the next town, and someone will message, hey, you know, I've heard what you're doing, I believe in it, here's money. And so the challenge is to always remember that we are working for a vision, not for funds. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you both so much. My goodness, there's like so much richness in all, like we could just sit and talk about all of that for just like the rest of the day. So yeah, just thank you both for that. I'm just sort of absorbing because you all hit on so much. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about both of your stories is like there was an intention to transition from the beginning, which is really rare, right? We don't see that very often. And so it's beautiful to see that intention and like how that has translated to what you all have learned and the challenges and the beautiful work that you all are doing now. And I mean, you all both hit on it in different ways, right? This whole idea of like power being present in relationships between INGOs and local, whatever we mean by that, power dynamics in the sector broadly, power dynamics within the organizations you work in and how that translates to communities, right? Like it's everywhere in different ways, both tangible and intangible. And, you know, Pauline, you talk about how like the process of relinquishing control and what that was like. It's really interesting. And like how post-partnership, like post-transition partnerships are possible and what that looks like and how to navigate that amidst all of the power dynamics. And Tala, you talk about decision with funders and just like how we talk about local and the systems we're working in, and like this idea of vision, right, is such a transformation to how we work currently, or a lot of our organizations work currently. So there's just a lot there that I want us to sit with for just a little bit. And one of the things that I am curious about, right, is as we think about transition processes and all of the power dynamics that exist across all of these levels that we've talked about and haven't talked about, if there were some decisions that were made or some processes that happened or anything that you can sort of verbalize related to how this power shift was possible, how it happened in the transition itself, right? So what are some things that happened to make this possible? You know, and also I think power shifting can be really uncomfortable, right? So like, how did you all navigate that? And yeah, just anything you want to say as you're sort of sitting with this whole sort of messiness of shifting power. And maybe Pauline, we can hand it to you first.
Okay, thank you so much, Grace. I'll say there is usually what we had a saying with my team leader who left, that there's never a dull moment in Nuru. And this was because when we were doing the transition, there was a lot of drama involved. It's not easy to relinquish control and power. The dynamics came into play right from when we were doing the restructuring, and when I was also transitioning from an impact programs manager to the director. Remember, I am a lady in a very patriarchal community. And then also at the board level, we had board members who are purely drawn from the community. And here we are challenging ourselves as an organization to now be locally led by a lady who is not even from this specific community, and also try to bring diversity in our board and ensure that as we are evolving the strategy, because the issues that were emerging needed solutions that were different, so we needed a different skill set at the board. So that's where we started now the bit of drama here and there. And we had to do a lot of dialogue with the community. We had to also be very well coordinated as a board and ensure that we are not transitioning out members because they are not significant. It's because we are in a transition phase that requires that we structure ourselves differently and we embrace diversity and bring in different skill sets so that we can move the organization forward. And when we were able to articulate ourselves and explain the rationale, then the members of the community gradually accepted that. So even when we were bringing in a different set of technical team with various expertise and setting up departments, transitioning from an agriculture department that the community knew all along from 2008, and now rebranding to a livelihood department. Here we are merging some departments, like we had financial inclusion, we had healthcare. Right now, they are all in the leadership training and development department. We don't have them operating distinctly. So we had to move staff around. We had to bring in new staff who needed now to blend with the local staff. So it was a lot of work that was going on. And we're even setting up new entities, like we have a Nuru Regional Training College that we started setting up immediately after the transition, so that we could have a team that is now even providing that support to professionalize our courses that are livelihood based, and we needed to undergo a lot of compliance activities. So there was a lot of decision making right from the organ that governs the organization, that is the board of directors, all the way to how we are structured as staff. And also, we're now setting up the cooperatives. When the foundation team was working with us, they were working through informal groups. Now we're looking at sustainability of the livelihood interventions. We are mobilizing the community to establish farmer-led organizations. These cooperatives are now going to be led by these farmers. We had to now look at how do we support them to lead themselves, develop training that is not just for the staff. Initially, we were just having capacity building geared towards the staff to build their capacity to implement. Now we had to come up with other modules that are building the capacity of the community to lead their own entities. And that's when a lot of deliberate effort is needed when you're relinquishing control and recognizing that leaders are present at various levels, and you need to also empower others to be leaders, to lead themselves. They are the ones investing in their strategy on poverty reduction. They are the ones who need to be discussing issues of sustainability, the agribusiness solutions we are talking about. Yes, we might have the knowledge and skills, even from other projects we've worked in, but we need them to be able to articulate their own issues and design their own solutions to the problems. And then we are just there to support them once we identify the gaps that are maybe blocking them from achieving their objectives. So we made very deliberate effort to make decisions that would help us to support the leaders in the various categories, in the various organizations, and also look inwardly and internally reorganize ourselves and relinquish that control, and even let other people leave where others were joining, so that we could be able to be this new entity that is responding to issues differently and in a more community-driven manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Okay, so Grace, I know that you are asking about power shift and transition, and I did have some prepared answers for that. But sitting here, let me expand that question a little bit. Okay, so of course, first I mentioned a while ago that we really didn't have any difficulty in the power shift because we started with a shared vision and shared values, right? So there was not much power struggle because right from the start, both the funders and our organization were having the same, we're of one mind. Second, and this is what I want to point out, is that transition, or the topic of transition, is both external and internal. So external, for example, as an organization and as individuals in the organization, how do we engage with our funders, who are usually white, North American, and who are usually economically rich? How do we engage with other actors like the government, like other sectors? So that's so transition in an external environment. However, transition is also internal. So let me just share a little bit of our history of the Philippines. So Philippines has been colonized by hundreds of years of Spain, United States, and Japan, and also UK for a few years. There were two tribes, there were people groups from the north and south that were not colonized, but right now, the dominant government in our country came from those colonized places. Our psyche as nations, as people groups, and even as Filipinos were negatively damaged by that history of colonization. There's a strong internal colonization, and whether we like it or not, or whether we admit to it or not, that shapes how we engage with the world. So, for example, even because of the systems that we have, the educational systems, there is that thought among many of our people that we are second class when we are in the presence of white-skinned people. Our passport is way lesser than the passport of North American countries. And so when we engage as a people with these identities, there is a tendency to just follow what they say. Like, for example, in a table, and there's one white man talking, the tendency will be, we'll just nod, right? So how do we deal with that? Why is it connected with transition? If there's one white man telling you what transition looks like, the tendencies will follow that white man. So how do we deal with that? We start internally. We start reclaiming our identity, our story, so that we can engage with that, whoever has more power, economically and socially. We can engage with who we are, and we can say, wait, that is not how transition looks like for us. But it has to come from here, because it's so hard to speak when your history tells you to be quiet. And for me to be here right now speaking, it took many years of healing. Transition is also internal. So what does that mean when we work with communities? Without my healing, without that significant healing, and not just me, but the members of our organization, actually, we really go through one-on-one mentorship, specifically because of this. If we don't go through that, we would copy the colonizer system. We would go to the communities and say, we know everything. So that's why healing is important. So then we go to the communities and we have that internal capacity to celebrate what they have and who they are. And most of the times when we go to communities, the internal colonization is so strong. Even, for example, just like in coffee, they will not offer us their coffee. They will offer us 3-in-1 because they think their coffee is not good. That's colonization out there. And like, for example, indigenous communities, we have communities who will tell us, no, we don't have to go through free, prior, and informed consent, because there's always that feeling of shame that they're not deserving of the time, of that storytelling, of the time to listen to their stories. And so as a community, as organization, we actually say, no, let's go through FPIC. Let's go through free, prior, and informed consent. It's a very simple thing. But what happened with that? Because we truly started with honoring them. These people groups now say when multinational companies, other sectors come to them, they will tell those people, oh, go through FPIC like coffee for PT. So very simple actions, but it actually transformed the internal and the external, those external systems. So now the farmers, when the traders come, the farmers would really, really stand on their dignity that our coffee should be priced like this because. But it took some years before that's or before they were able to do that. So that's it.
Oh goodness, that's so powerful. Thank you both. Yeah, I'm really struck by that, and I appreciate, Tala, your just sort of laying out the role of like internal healing and how that supports external transformation. And I think that resonates hopefully with all of us in the sense of that looks different for all of us, where we come from, our identities, our history, our country's history, all of it, but how that's such an important process. So thank you for that. And I think, one of the things that I'm really struck by with both of your stories and the experiences of your organization is how transformative it has been for communities themselves, right? This whole question of like, both of you have talked in different ways, but it was similar threads of like the role that communities are in the lead for your organization. And I think that's something that gets a little bit lost in this conversation of, it's at least in where I sit and in a lot of conversations I'm a part of, it's like international to local, but we miss oftentimes the role that, you know, transformation that's happening with organizations like yours to the community, like how powerful that is. That's so powerful. And so wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the outcomes of the transition, what you're doing now. And I've heard both of you talk a lot about, like, you know, Pauline, you hit a lot on this, you know, the ways that Neuro is growing and the cooperatives and how you're doing transitions with communities, which is so interesting. Again, it's not something we hear a lot about. So I would love to hear more about the work that you're doing and however you want to share that. And then Tala, same to you. Would love to just give a little bit of space for this. So yeah, maybe Pauline, if you want to kick us off.
Okay, thanks, Grace. So for us, I would say we are actively working ourselves out of a job in Migori County. It's not an easy decision, but that's the reality, because when you empower the community, then they're able to take off and stand on their own and regenerate the investment that you've made in them. So that's our success. That's their success, because they're defining the success themselves, and we are there to support them to achieve that success. Then we don't have any qualms about us being eventually irrelevant in their journey of sustainability, because we know they're going to continue to do it themselves. They are going to be able to evolve solutions as they encounter challenges in future, because they have acquired the skills and they have the infrastructure that is needed. So in the remote rural setting, what we've realized is that for the community, they are very willing and ready. They are very motivated, because they're the ones who are living with these challenges. So when the environment is enabling, they are able to tough out whatever situations they will encounter. So we are scaling our interventions to other areas that are more needy. And through the cooperative approach, we have made sure that they are legally registered, they are recognized by the county and national governments. We have supported them to set up those structures that are required. We've been able to build their capacity in leadership and governance. We've been able to expose them to other interventions on poverty reduction that have worked elsewhere. We've encouraged them to invest in their interventions. They are now being able to aggregate their produce together and even market the produce themselves. And whatever was lacking, like the value chains that we needed to help them support, we've reached out to other partners, and they've been able to help us build that out and establish that sustainable ecosystem that the farmers need, that the cooperatives need for them to continue to thrive. So we feel that scaling successes is very important. We now were able to scale to Homa Bay County and work with farmers who are experiencing a different set of dynamics on poverty. And we are now in even a tougher region where there's a lot of insecurity. And the county government at first was very worried about our capability. They even had to come all the way and visit us at Migori and even speak to the farmers we are working with. We started out with in Migori, for them to be confident about our capability to work in their region, because they know their region is quite tough. A lot of cattle rustling, a lot of insecurity. And for us, we have that experience of working in such areas and that expertise. So when you look at how we've grown, we have also had to evolve the way we deliver our interventions to the community. We've been able to set ourselves up also sustainably, and we are on that journey of sustainability as an organization, as we also want to empower our community members to be sustainable in their approach. We also want to look at ourselves as an organization. How sustainable are we, even to raise funds for the interventions that we are implementing? That is why we've come up with the college. It's a resource center, not just for the farmers, but also for the students out there. We have been able to work with graduates who need practical experience in dairy farming, in poultry, in horticulture, because we have the expertise and the infrastructure to support that. Our site is also accredited to offer other internal courses that are not available elsewhere, like the leadership and governance for cooperatives, that is targeting directly the management committees, the business planning, the financial management, the cooperative policy. Some do not even know how to operate within the environment they are, the regulatory environment they are supposed to. So we are able to provide that. Then we have the enterprises that are coming in to cushion the community members. So like the animal feeds processing and the milk processing plants that we've been able to set up. Then we look at also how we are setting ourselves up in staffing. We are looking at being lean and agile and being able to have the expertise that is relevant so that whatever situations we encounter, we are able to adequately address that. Then visibility, as we work on visibility for the organization, we are also working on visibility for the community, the farmer-led organizations. And that through that way, we've been able to even support them to secure funding, even from big organizations like RTI. Even the national government is funding them because they've realized these are credible entities. So when we look at where we've come from and what the outcomes are, I would say we've had huge wins. We've been able, through the Stopping a Success case study, it was an eye-opener because we documented a lot of our journey and we keep reflecting on that. We don't want to lose it along the way, forget some of these lessons and challenges as we transition ours and win the community of dependency on us. So the lessons that we were articulating to the donors when we talk to Nuru International, the same way we were talking to them so that they could let us be and, be confident about us being successful, are the same lessons we are also applying on ourselves as we communicate with and work with the communities that we are in. Thanks.
Hi. Okay, so the question was, how did transition impact the community working? So I've mentioned it a while ago. It really impacted the personal and communal healing. I think I will just tell one story because there's a lot, but I will just tell one story of one community we've been working with. So the very first time that I went there, they invited us and we asked them, well, how do you define peace? And they said, peace for us is when we can sell our coffee at a high price. Okay, if you are an organization dependent on a lag frame because your funding says that, you will not be able to follow what the community is saying, right? Because, for example, your lag frame says, well, you have to have 10 dialogues this month. So you have to do the 10 dialogues. But because we are not bound by that, we were able to respond to that need. We want peace for us is when we can sell our coffee at a high price. And that's what we do in all communities. We always engage with the felt need first that they articulate. And so, of course, we did trainings and everything. It was a long journey. Again, it was like a 3-year journey so that they can increase their coffee quality, because it really involved values and peace and reconciliation training. Again, if you are very dependent on a lag frame, you have to finish it in 6 months or in a year. We are also not bound by that. We follow the community's timeline. So there's just so much freedom. And so where are they now? Where are these community now? Because the reason why their coffee is very low, the quality is very bad. There's no farm to market road, or the farm to market road is really, really bad. The housing, food security, what else? Education of funds for education was also, it wasn't, they didn't have the economic power to sustain basic needs. because of many factors: the political, the excessive capitalism, the graft and corruption, so many things. But we just focus on increasing the coffee quality. So right now, after several years, this community is actually exporting their coffee to other countries. They're actually traveling to other countries to showcase their coffee, and it's always there. Like a lot of buyers are always at their doors seeking for their coffee. They with their price, a very just price. They're winning national competitions for coffee quality. They actually have really beautiful houses now that are secure, that can withstand typhoon, because we are often hit by typhoon. Their kids are going to school, to universities. Oh, I have just this one story. So they haven't experienced going to the bank, and this is just one story that it just made me chuckle. So they never experienced going to the bank, and so their first order, like big order, was 4 million pesos. I don't know how much is that in dollars, but it's a huge amount of money. And so the representative went to the bank, and of course she didn't look like someone that the bank will serve, right? And so again, internal colonization. The bank was just serving all the other better dressed clients, and she was just sitting there not knowing what to do. And finally, there's no more other clients but her. So the bank, of course, the bank now has to serve her because there's no one. She went there and said, "Can I encash this check?" And then the bank was so shocked, because it was millions, and the bank didn't have that kind of money. And so suddenly they called the manager and they told her, "Would you like to open a bank account?" And so they opened a bank account. They gave her all the services of the bank. And then a few years ago, she was telling us, the bank was calling her saying, "Hey, would you like to have a loan?" And she said, "No, thank you. I don't need it." That's because of a very of a transition, or not, I don't like to call that word transition, but of a transformational of peace building and development work that starts with them. Imagine if we didn't hear their stories. That wouldn't have happened.
Thank you, Tala. Thank you, Pauline. So I'm going to ask one more question, because I know we're running short on time. So we have 30 more minutes. So as a reminder, as we get to the hour mark, please stay on, because we have one more question. We want to specifically talk about the Humanitarian Development Peacebuilding Nexus a little bit, because that's the theme of the event. And then we also want to get a chance to hear questions from you all. So please stay with us. And as you have questions for us, please put them in the chat, because we will get to that right after this question. So so the event, a big part of the session that Ideal is organizing is around humanitarian development, peace building, coherence. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how has your role as a locally led organization impacted, influenced your ability to work across this nexus? What are some of the opportunities you see for local organizations, as we often know are better placed to address working across this nexus? So would love to hear your reflections on working across the Humanitarian Development Peace Building Nexus, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we'll pass it over to maybe Tala. You can start us off for this round.
Okay, so how did our organization impact the nexus of humanitarian development and peace building, right? So that was the question. Well, actually, I've already mentioned this before. It really impacted the internal and external, the personal and communal living. Number two, actually, even the thought of combining the humanitarian, peace building, and development in one, because usually this is siloed, right? And our organization said, no, it's not. So we actually, right from the start, that's why we have a Peace Builders community and Coffee for Peace. Coffee for Peace is a for-profit social enterprise that came out of peace building. And so right from the start, we have been taking all these strategies as one, as holistic. So and it wasn't common actually. When you talk of peace, you don't talk of development before. Or when you talk of humanitarian, then it's just humanitarian. And we're saying, like, especially during typhoon, humanitarian like operations. There's not much talks. There's not much discussion on the long-term peace building. And that's what we are doing. Like every time we do humanitarian operations, it has to be founded, it has to be grounded on a long-term vision for peace building. And so I think one impact would be to have that discussion, to open that space for other organizations, for multi-sectoral stakeholders to really see the connection, to see that it is not that, to see the intertwining of these three. So that's one huge impact. Another impact would be the communities themselves. Like, and I've been telling, I actually told you already about this. Like, because we are locally led, we have the capacity to embrace or to make space for the communities to be locally led too, right? So, and so because it's two locally led organizations or communities working together, it's vibrant. It's not program led, and so the sustainability, even though we are not there, like for example, right now the community that I was just sharing you about, we are no longer there. Actually, a lot of the communities that we have worked with, our presence is no longer there, and yet it still continues. So that's one huge impact, right? Because it's hard. Honestly, it's hard to say letting the communities be locally led if your organization is not locally led, and vice versa, right? And so that's another impact. And so what does that mean? How does it translate to the communities' lives? Sustainability, and then I've also mentioned it a while ago, like their needs, their physical needs that they articulate. Are met. Actually, some organizations, some tribes, for example, they would like to focus more on cultural identity, on speaking traditions, and they are able to do that because of being locally led. And so, yeah, I think that's the impact that I can think of right now. I'm sure probably in the question and answer I will be able to think of some more.
Thanks, Carla.
Oh, I know one. I think because we're locally led, when we talk in spaces like this, we can have stories.
Thanks, Carla. Over to you, Pauline.
Yeah, thanks, Stella. Thanks, Grace. So I would say for us, I'll echo actually what Stella is saying, that you really have to transform yourself. And when you are locally led, it becomes easy to have these conversations and also include the community in that space. I'll also indicate that we are in a very interesting space right now in Nuru, because the communities we've scaled into, especially the latest county, Baringo, this is a community that is experiencing a lot of disasters. So we have a lot of humanitarian organizations with interventions in that county. And here we are, a development organization that is talking about locally led organizations that are investing in their solutions. And we have humanitarian organizations that are already so used to giving donations and helping the community to mitigate during disasters. So, and we had to participate in a county steering group forum and start the discussions and conversations on sustainability and transformation, and not just the short-term approaches that address the disasters and hazards the community is facing on a short-term for the short term. So these are not easy conversations. I remember last week on Tuesday, we were in such a forum, and they were really asking us, how do we negotiate with the community? How do we reach out to them to even invest? These are people who are already experiencing challenges. What is it you're seeing that they can bring to the table? How are they even able to discuss with you long-term strategies? And so I am seeing us being very relevant in that steering group, because we have to really ensure the community understands that even as much as their short-term issues are being addressed, they have to think, they are the ones who need to think about the long-term solutions. And these organizations also need to support them to achieve their long-term goals. So they shouldn't just be available to them in the short term. So there is that humanitarian effort that will be required, but then there is that conversation, very difficult conversation that needs to happen. And so they asked, how is it possible even the community is receptive to us? We are not, for them, the entry point is usually those donations. For us, it's conversation. And we are calling them to dialogue. And they're asking us, what strategy do you have? And we are telling them, we don't have the answers. You are the ones to help us come up with the answers so that we can work on those solutions together. So it's not easy. And I'd say it's a very interesting journey we've started. We are just 1 year old and we've not given any donations, but we respect the fact that without these organizations working in these communities, they would not have helped the households to even survive the tragedies they've gone through. But for us, we are looking at those households. Are we increasing their income in the long term? Are we building their resilience? What is the asset base? How do we determine their future? Because we can't just rely on the short-term effort. So bringing together the stakeholders, and when they were able to see that we are ready to dialogue, we are ready to even chat a long-term strategy with them, then they have become very receptive. They are really looking forward to these stakeholder meetings, because we are now going to go into a co-creation process together, and the community is feeling valued. Their dignity is being upheld. We feel they are important in the process of decision-making about their future. And so those dialogue sessions have been very informative, and we are telling them, you have the solutions. It's just that you probably have not engaged in the dialogue, in chatting the way forward, and we are going to provide that platform for you. The resources that you feel are minimal are very integral to this process, even your ideas and the storytelling about the past experiences and what they feel is possible can be done and in a sustainable way. That is what we need to hear. We need to do a lot of listening. We need to do a lot of collaboration. We need to make sure that we have that synergy and bring together the humanitarian and the development and have a hybrid strategy that incorporates both things.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Tala. Yeah.
I would like to add something.
Sure.
Because for me, it's important. Actually, being locally led, one huge impact for us as peace building workers in our team, we are less stressed because we are not rushing to fulfill a number or to fulfill an objective that's external, and there's such less possibility to develop a savior complex because the communities are they're leading themselves. We're just like we're just co-sojourners, we're just listeners, actually the first community I worked with, I was literally just listening to them, taking notes, reading to them what they have been telling, pouring coffee, washing their dishes, and then they think that I did a lot. But honestly, I was just there. It's so less stressful if it's local. It's truly locally.
Thanks, Tala. Thanks for adding that. Okay, great. So we are at the time, as these conversations always happen, we're over time, of course, but it's all good. So we want to have maybe 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll have a closing at the end. So with that, I believe I haven't seen any immediate questions in the chat, but I know someone from our team has one prepared. So I'll invite Hasi to unmute and jump in with your question. While she's doing that, please add any other questions you have for our speakers in the chat, and we'll be happy to get to those. So Hasi, perhaps I'll invite you to unmute and jump in if you're able to do so.
Of course. Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you, Pauline and Tala. This has been super exciting and also interesting. I have a lot of questions, but I will try to limit myself to like one or two. But I think Pauline touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear more about when you're partnering with, as a local organization now, when you're partnering with organizations across the humanitarian development peacebuilding nexus, what are some of the learnings you shared with these organizations that allowed them to kind of think about the transformational process from the beginning itself? I would love to hear more about that if you can share.
Okay, thank you for that question. So some of the learnings that we were able to share included the need to invite the community members to invest in solutions to the challenges they're facing, as opposed to you rushing and giving what you feel is needed. Of course, we have, we are now a key player and a key partner in the disaster response steering committee. And I know some of these communities at some point need this response efforts, but then when you get into the planning phase early, then you are able to include their resources in those response efforts. So we are currently reviewing the contingency plan for the county, and this is what is bringing up these conversations. Like, do we have to be the ones doing it for them all the time? Because what we have seen is that it's not sustainable. We keep experiencing the same situations year in, year out. There'll be that flooding. Of course, climate change issues have to be addressed sustainably, and it's a gradual process. But then, are we including the voice of the community in these efforts? When they experience these challenges, how are we addressing that? How are we incorporating their input in that? Are we even looking at the resources that they have on the table that could assist the development effort so that it can be a sustainable effort? So again, being very flexible and innovative is something that we have realized we were challenging them to do, that they need to be also able to embrace new concepts. At some point, we realize we are in a position to offer the same support. It's just that it's structured differently. We have a revolving fund for us where we empower the community to access it, but they have to invest in order to access it. They have also, they don't have a revolving fund, but they have the same resources we are supporting the community with. So if, for instance, you need to support a household to acquire a heifer or a beehive, then what is the process of issuing this beehive or this heifer? Has the farmer invested in it so that they can value it, as opposed to just donating it? Because when you donate it, at some point, there's no attachment. There's no investment this farmer has done. So when they encounter challenges with feeding or even setting it up, they will really relinquish that ownership and fall back to feeling that helpless. So even the mechanism of giving that support needs to change so that there is that aspect of ownership that comes in. There is that aspect of responsibility and accountability. And when we started these conversations and we were sharing how we even weaned off our cooperatives in Migori County from dependency on us, from dependency even on Nuru International when the foundation team was transitioning out. When we shared that, and the steering group members from the county were able to visit us in Migori and see it for themselves, then they started even looking at how do they channel resources to the community in a more sustainable way, in a way that does not make the community feel they are very helpless, they really need to always be helped. So we are redesigning our interventions together, and actually in the month of July, we've invited them to a stakeholder workshop where we are looking at the livelihood strategy. How do we design it so that we have the same approach when it comes to the community? They don't attend our meetings because there's an allowance, they're attending because we value their input and we want to work with them in the long term. So I would say some of those learnings. Then again, understanding about relinquishing control. And also, it's not a game of numbers, it's a game of impact. You are in it for impact. You're not in it to just recount. We gave out these bales of sugar and flour and all that. We are in it to report that this number of households have been supported not to experience these disasters in the future. So that is the language we want to start talking. And so we really have to change things right from the planning phases. Then strengthening our relationships at the county, strengthening our relationship as stakeholders, and making sure that we invest also in exposure to those strategies that have worked in areas where they were very disaster-prone, humanitarian-oriented. Donations were just on for short-term interventions, and looking at what has changed when it comes to development conversations. They are tough, but they are doable. So I would say the learning is, we are also learning a lot because the scenario is different. The issues are also different. They are more challenging. When we have insecurity and presence in the county, your presence is not even, your security is not guaranteed when you're in the community. Then there is a lot that needs to be thought out. But we feel that being close to the community is very important. When you're close to them, when you're experiencing the challenges together with them is very key. And I would say for us, we are not averse to working in such areas. So when we are speaking, the stakeholders feel it is the community person speaking, not an outsider. And also when we are with the community, they feel we understand the challenges they are going through. So we are able also to have a conversation at their level. I hope I'm able to, this is going to be a continued conversation for us. We'll continue sharing these lessons.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, thank you. And we have a few questions in the chat, and I think with time, I'm gonna try to group them together and then just hand it to you all for sort of a, answer them how you want and a last word, but I'll just ask us to be mindful of time because we have about 5 minutes until we have to wrap up. So, there's two questions for Tala related to monitoring and evaluation. So asking, you know, how you define peace and not using predetermined long frames. It'd be great to hear how you do monitoring and evaluation differently. Connected to that, there's another question around working with communities based on their timelines and not sticking to specific numbers. So how do you factor such a strategy into monitoring and evaluation? How does this strategy influence reporting to your broader stakeholders? So Tala, hold that question. And then the other question is for both of you. What is your advice to international organizations, NGOs, that are not locally led? So talking about Catholic Relief Services, there's a guiding principle of subsidiarity, that decisions should be made at the level of people most affected. We have community visioning processes, and we press our donors for more time to ensure that there's adequate space for co-creation and design with communities, but we cannot ensure that they're not biased in the process. So what could they do differently? So Tala, I'll hand it to you first and give you a spectacular challenge of trying to answer that in like 2 minutes, and then pass it over to you, Pauline, for the last word. Thank you.
Should I answer the two questions already? Like, oh, yeah, okay. So let's go first to the how do you do MNET currently? Well, the first question is who is the who is the MNE for? To whom is the MNE for? So if monitoring and evaluation is for the community, then they do their own MNE. But for example, for us, MNE for funding partners, we invite them to the community. And actually this is also my answer to the previous question. What are the lessons we tell INGOs? We let the community's stories, the people's stories, like the people's stories are the proof of concept themselves. And so when we invite our funding partners and they see the impact, then that's already most of the time, not most of the time, all of the time, that's enough. And also because of we're really faithful to our core, what happens is that organization or media, we get awarded a lot, and we're not applying for awards. It gets noticed not because we are so good, but because the stories of the people get noticed, because it's real people. So the organization, our organization gets free media mileage, and they go to the people to interview them, and they actually do the evaluation for us. Like for example, the shoe job, it's an MNE for it's for inclusive businesses, and they they measure scalability, and they measure sustainability, they measure impact. They came to us and asked us if they can evaluate us, and then they gave us an award. And so again, it's not because we are running after them, but it's because the stories of the people are shared. So that's one thing. How do we manage any request? Number one is dialogue. So we usually talk with funding partners, like, why would you need a land frame? Where are you coming from? And then we also share that, especially the Philippine context of relationships. And all of that, every time, I'm actually trying to think if I was asked of a love frame. I was only asked once, because they had this project, they had this experiment of doing localization, and so there's like 3 INGOs coming together and all of that. And I was only asked once, but I said no, and I said I'm willing to get out of the project, and they said no, you can do what you want. So basically that's it. Yeah, I never did any love frame. We never do any love frames, and it's usually through dialogue that we get to understand each other.
Thank you, Tala.
Oh, I'm sorry, I need to answer the CRS thing.
So we are really short on time, unfortunately. So I think what I would actually maybe recommend, if we're comfortable, is to put our emails in the chat for Lisa's question. And Lisa, if you can email us, or we can email you if you want to give us our email, so we can keep the conversation going, because it's a really beautiful question. And I know there's other interest in that question, but unfortunately with time, I am sad to say that we have to wrap up our conference. Thank you, Lisa. She provided her email address. So let's email her. We'll be in touch on that question. I'll copy it. We'll capture it. And then maybe Tala and Pauline, let's combine your names. If you want to maybe have a last word, so like 30 seconds. It'll be really, really quick, unfortunately, because we'll have to pass over to the ideal team. So Pauline, any last words really, really quickly?
Yes, thank you, Grace. And I'd say investing in locally led organizations is key. It's intensive in terms of time, the inclusivity that is needed, learning, a lot of negotiation, but the process is worth the effort. It's very transformative. You are able to regenerate resources instead of keeping on looking for ways of issuing or donating new resources to the communities. The communities are able to drive themselves. So I would say open to more conversations about this, how to transition into locally led organizations, and also how to ensure the communities are the ones leading the interventions themselves. Thank you.
Okay, for me, just last word, Like this work, transition, peace building, humanitarian, development, it all starts with questioning, why are we doing the things that we are doing? How do we see the world? And then ask also that of the people we are working with. Because if we're just doing this for work, it's easy to get side swayed. It's easy to get boxed by the existing systems. But if we truly come from this vision of being transformed for peace, because this is how the Creator made us, then the systems will not box you. So really start with our being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tala and Pauline. Always appreciate you both. So thank you. And Norma, I believe I'm handing it over to you. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Pauline and Tala, for sharing your experience and valuable insights. At the start of this journey, we learned at the kickoff that HTP Nexus is about INGOs realigning with the communities in which they work. Today, we heard that locally led HTP Coherence embraces divergent views. It celebrates the identities and cultures of local communities. We were reminded that locally led HTP Coherence requires flexibility and patience, listening to the stories and histories of local communities. Locally led HTP Coherence isn't weighed down by HTP jargon. It is the most affected who lead and drive change. So we are almost out of time, but before we let you go, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the session so we can improve on future events. We are going to share a short survey on the chat. It will take you less than 2 minutes to complete. This event concludes the Advancing Locally Led HTP Coherence thematic area of knowledge sharing series. Next up, it will be the thematic area of data for decision-making in the HTP Coherence. So please join us on July 12th, 13th, and 14th. You can find the link to register in the chat. Later in August, join us as we explore coordination and communication in HTP Coherence and sequencing and layering and integrating HTP. These last sessions will be open for registration in a few weeks. So please, we invite you to follow us on FSN Network to receive news and updates about these events. For now, we will keep the Zoom meeting open and play some music in the background as you complete the survey, and we say goodbye. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Goodbye.